Boonesboro. Admiral de Grasse. Francois Joseph Paul de Grasse was an admiral in the French Navy. Is probably best known for his victory in the Battle of Chesapeake, where he prevented British troops from arriving to reinforce the army at Yorktown. Because of us. De Grasse was the youngest child of the... obviously, I know that Connor isn't an actual person, but... in the game, he would not have done that if it wasn't for Connor's intervention. De Grasse was the youngest child of a French nobleman. He joined the military at the age of 11 when he became a page with the religious military order of Malta. Huh. There was something I remember learning about in Shakespeare of all things when we were in my Shakespeare class of all things when we were learning about the Merchant of Venice. And how that apparently that play has some similarities with another play called The Jew of Malta. I don't remember who wrote that play. I really want to know where Malta is. He joined the French Navy proper in 1740, and by 1775 was serving as a captain. He helped secure Saint Dominique and now Haiti for the French, which probably looked good on a resume at the time. Grasse was promoted to admiral in 1781 despite failing health, was given orders to sail for America to help Washington. His victory at Chesapeake was so significant that Washington wrote to him the day after Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, saying that the honor of the victory belonged to de Grasse. Grasse died in 1788, just before the beginning of the French Revolution. Despite his role in aiding the rebels in America, de Grasse was considered a nobility in France, as his state was ransacked by French revolutionaries. His family fled to the United States, where they were welcomed as the children of a hero. I guess hero and oppressor all depends on your perspective. You say tomato, I say tomato. You say potato, I say potato. Actually, no one says potato. Benjamin Talmadge. Oh, him. Benjamin Talmadge was the head of intelligence for the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. The British, of course, would have called that an oxymoron. I don't get that. Benjamin Talmadge was the head of intelligence for the Continental Army during the Revolution. I don't get that at all. How is that an oxymoron? Is that just saying that the British wouldn't think that the Continental Army had any intelligence? I don't get that. Talmadge was originally from New York, but moved to Connecticut before the Revolution broke out. He served as a lieutenant and then a major in the militia before being asked by George Washington to lead the intelligence department. Talmadge used his contacts in New York to form the Copper Ring, a league of spies that observed and reported on the British actions in New York. It's possible his contacts also discovered Benedict Arnold's treachery, and that's disputed. After the war, Talmadge returned to Connecticut, where he became a merchant and politician, was elected to the House of Representatives in 1801. And how many more are there? Yeah, I may just read the entirety of the characters and just show all the rest. I also want to check to see how long it's been. 15 minutes. Alright. I may have to edit this video slightly so it's not too long, because something tells me it's going to be well over an hour by the time I'm done. But I'll just be cutting this Codex thing into different parts. But John Fraser. John Fraser, also spelled Fraser or Fraser, was a Scottish-born trader living in the area of Fort Duquesne during the French and Indian War and a participant in the Braddock expedition. Fraser left Scotland sometime after 1745, possibly because of political troubles. Fraser had supported the Stuarts, who were on the losing end of the rebellion. He set up trade on the upper Allegheny River, but was quickly run out of his cabin by the French. He moved further down the river near modern-day Pittsburgh, built a new cabin, and continued to trade. Fraser was one of the settlers building a fort on the site of Fort Duquesne near his own land. When the French took over again, British supplied Washington's attempt to reclaim the fort in 1754, was followed by the defeat at Fort Necessity, and served as a chief scout during the Braddock expedition. After Braddock failed, Fraser gave up on the area, depriving the French of a third opportunity to chase him off his land. So I suppose as a small victory, he moved to Tuscarora Valley before finally setting at Fort Bedford. John Hancock. John Hancock was a Whig leader in Boston prior to the Revolutionary War and went on to be the president of the Second Continental Congress, which was responsible for creating the Declaration of Independence. All very impressive, but most impressive of all was that his name would live on to be slang for a signature. Now that's a legacy. One day, I imagine Sean will be used by children to describe a world-weary sneer. I can but dream. Hancock was born in Massachusetts, the son of a reverend, but his father died when he was young and John was sent to live with his uncle in Beacon Hill. Thomas Hancock ran a prosperous shipping business which John inherited when his uncle died in 1764. Hancock was a noted businessman and probably made at least some of this money smuggling, which he was tried for in 1768. Though he was never convicted, he joined the Patriot cause after the Stamp Acts were imposed in 1764, and he went on to be one of the instigators of the Tea Party. In fact, after the Revolution began, he was such a well-known rebel that when the Boston governor offered clemency to anyone who laid down their arms, Hancock was specifically left out of the deal. Hancock is probably best known for signing the Declaration of Independence. His signature was the first on the document. Possibly because of that, and possibly because Hancock was known for being extravagant, his name is signed with the flourish, written larger than any of the others. Now in America, your signature is sometimes referred to as your John Hancock. I needn't explain why to some people that sounds a little bit dirty, but I will say, sounds like a penis reference. Of course. John Parker. John Parker was the captain of the Lexington militia and therefore the man in charge of the battle on the day of the battles of Lexington and Concord. Parker was a farmer by trade, but since he'd been a soldier in the French and Indian War, he was placed in command despite the fact that he was quite ill with tuberculosis at the time. That's interesting. Parker went on to join the Continental Army in the siege of Boston, but was too ill to be involved in the Battle of Bunker Hill. Parker died in September 1775. The statue of the Minuteman on Lexington Green is said to be a representation of him. Though since there is no known pictures of Parker, resemblance is sketchy at best. It's thought that counts. Another figure in American history that I was never taught about. Robert Newman. Another burp, sorry. Robert Newman was a sexton of the Christ Church known today as the Old North Church, and a personal friend of Paul Revere's. It was Newman who hung lanterns from church steeple to warn the riders in Charlestown that the British were marching on Lexington and Concord. 2 lanterns indicating that the British were traveling by sea. And because it's a pet peeve of mine, you may have heard that Newman put up the lanterns to warn Paul Revere about the British approach. It's one of those historical details that everyone seems to get wrong. Revere already knew about the raid and in fact had been the one to pass the knowledge on to Newman. The lanterns were meant to be as a warning to lookouts in Charlestown that back up in case Revere was caught before he managed to leave town. Please leave this so you can impress girls on first dates as I do. Though the option seems so overwhelmed by them to rarely call again. As the power of knowledge and its dangers. Wow. Oh god, I love Sean Hastings. Newman had some difficulty with his. Still laughing about that. With his clandestine plan, though. His family home was serving as a boarding house, and several British officers were staying there. Newman managed to elude them by saying he was tired going to bed and escaping out a side window, like something out of a cartoon. His friend John Poling helped him to get the lanterns to the top of the tower, while a third man guarded the church door. Newman was later questioned about his actions that night, possibly because a 20-something announcing he's going to bed early is inherently suspicious. But he talked his way out of arrest and fled Boston. When Newman returned to the city, he went back to his old job as church sexton. There's evidence he took money to show tourists around the church crypt, including displaying the body of John Pitcairn, which might have something to do with Newman being replaced by a new sexton in 1788. Pitcairn, huh? Samuel Prescott. When Paul Revere and William Dawes left Lexington on their way to Concord, they were joined by Samuel Prescott, a young doctor from Concord. Prescott was a member of the Sons of Liberty, a natural choice for an anti-British nighttime ride. Prescott was in Lexington that night to visit his fiancée, I assume that's who we saw run off. He was intending to return home late, a happy coincidence for Revere and Dawes. Prescott knew the area well, so when the three men were stopped by British troops, it was Prescott who managed to elude his pursuers and reach Concord to sound the alarm. Here's a strange thing. After that night, well, Prescott sort of disappears. I have a record that he may have died as a British prisoner in Halifax in 1777, but it's far from clear-cut. I suppose they could have left Boston with the British on evacuation day, but how he was captured and when, I have no idea. And those are 4 words I never thought I'd say. History is spotty sometimes. William Dawes Jr. Character, I think I remember him. William Dawes Jr. was a Boston revolutionary and one of the writers sent out to warn Lexington and Concord that the British regulars were on their way the night of April 18, 1775. The other writer was, of course, Paul Revere. Revere took the route across the water to Charlestown. Dawes took the longer road across Boston Neck. He arrived in Lexington shortly after Revere did. Dawes was a tanner by trade. These days he would make a fortune in New Jersey. The amount of tanning that goes on there, while he wasn't as particularly politically active as Revere, he did wear a homespun suit to his wedding. Now, I know that doesn't sound intensely radical, but at the time it was quite a statement. At the time, the rebels were trying to enforce boycotts of British products like cloth, and encouraging people to buy American by advertising a suit was locally made. Dawes was putting himself firmly on the patriot side of the equation. Sorry. Keep on having these burps. Again, I just had dinner, well, just had been at this point 2 hours ago, Applebee's. But still a little bit gassy for me that, at the time, where was I? At the time, the rebels were trying to enforce boycotts of British products like cloth, encouraging people to buy American. By advertising the suit was locally made, Dawes was putting himself firmly on the patriot side of the equation. He might as well have worn a bowler hat and a mask with the face on. That would have been weird at a wedding. But that's actually closer to an hour since I last ate. Probably a little bit over an hour. William Molyneux. Molyneux doesn't usually make the list of well-known revolutionaries, mostly because he didn't live to see the outbreak of the revolution. He died in 1774. He was, however, one of the major Whig agitators in the years before the war started, right up there with Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Molyneux was a British-born merchant and supporter of the Patriot cause. As far as revolutionaries go, that makes him a bit of an outlier. British-born colonists tend to be loyalists. He was an Anglican? Isn't that supposed to be Anglican? Or am I just completely wrong? And those congregations were decidedly British learning. However, you couldn't doubt Molyneux's devotion to the cause. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is Anglican. He was known for being something of a hothead, so much so that he threatened people with death when they violated boycotts on British goods. Seems a bit extreme. He'd have a bloody field day on forums. On the night of the Boston Tea Party, Molyneux just appeared from the crowd outside the Old South Meeting House. Though almost every other well-known revolutionary leader was there, still talking to the crowd. Molyneux was, of course, supervising the dumping of the tea. For this reason alone, I'm prepared to call him the most evil man in history. Siri! Siri was a servant in the household of Samuel Adams from about 1765 onward. She was given to Adams' second wife, Elizabeth Wells, as a wedding present. Because nothing says you care like, here, have a human being. However, Adam was morally opposed to slavery, insisting that she be freed before she came to live with him. She was, and worked with the Adams family for nearly 50 years, which would be so much less fun than working for the... Really? Really? Da-da-da-da. Oh god, why did you make that reference? That's such an old show. I don't want to sing that song. Incidentally, while Adams wouldn't own slaves himself, it wasn't something he fought particularly hard for during his political career. He did support anti-slavery measures in Massachusetts, but never forced the issue if it was going to cause friction between the states. It, along with other politics, was just so much more important. Obviously talking about Samuel Adams here, not Gomez. Who's Gomez? I have no idea who Gomez... Oh! Really? Gomez, I believe, is the father of the Addams Family, the old TV show. Okay, really? Of all the things they reference freaking Gomez and the Addams Family with 2 Ds. No idea who that is. More commonly known as something, Thaddeus something, Koszywski, and even more commonly mispronounced. This gentleman was a Polish soldier who served as an engineer in the Revolutionary War. Koszywski, I'm just gonna say it's Koszywski. I don't know how you pronounce that. I probably offended someone somewhere. Was the son of a Polish noble and learned military tactics as part of his private schooling. Joined the Continental Army in 1776. His full name was Thaddeus. Thaddeus Andrzej Bonaventura Koszewski. And while his surname may sound like a sneeze, Koszewski was in charge of founding and training the much-needed corps of the engineers for the Continental Armies, probably best known for overseeing the fortifications at Saratoga, which were crucial to the American victory there in 1777. He also helped build the fortifications at West Point, the ones Benedict Arnold tried to sell to the British. And the war ended, Congress promoted Koszewski to Brigadier General, probably just so they can call him Brigadier General instead of attempt his name. Also clearly in recognition for his service, and he returned to Poland, where in 1794 he led a rebellion of his own. Now known as the Koszewski Uprising, he lost and was jailed for 2 years in Russia before being exiled to France. Get this, after he died, Koszewski left some of his money to Thomas Jefferson with directions that it be used to free and educate black slaves. Unfortunately, Jefferson never bothered to use the money. It was returned to Koszewski's heirs in 1852. Well, at least he had a noble cause. Sadly, Jefferson apparently was a scumbag and just wasn't into it. William Kidd. Captain William Kidd was a Scottish privateer turned pirate and the center of numerous pirate legends. Not much is known about Kidd before the late 17th century, even his year of birth is approximate. It's reasonably certain he's from Scotland, and that's about it. Every good pirate needs a mysterious past. It first appeared in historical records in 1689 when he is listed as captain. He was a privateer for Britain and the West Indies before sailing to New York City, where he lived for several years. In 1695, Kidd was given a privateer's commission to hunt ships in the Indian Ocean and headed for Madagascar, which at the time was a known pirate haven. Then Kidd disobeyed the terms of his privateer's commission, attacking ships in the Red Sea. God, I keep on having these burps. Sorry. No one is quite sure why, but I guess that's pirates for you. They're bonkers. When Kidd returned to the West Indies in 1699, he found that he was a hunted man. He sold his ship, the Queda Merchant. I think that's pronounced Queda Merchant. In Hispaniola? Sure. And headed up the coast on the new ship. He knew he was likely to be caught and wanted to have bargaining chips to secure his freedom. So he started hiding treasure as he went, the idea that being that he could later give away the location in order to save his own skin. Kid was finally captured when he returned home to New York. Tried to talk and buy his way out of arrest, but it didn't work. He was heading for piracy in 1701, which must have been so annoying. Why would that be annoying? As for oh, because it was more of a privateer maybe than a pirate? I think he was more of a privateer instead of a pirate. As for Kid's treasure, it is known that he buried some of it on Gardiner's Island off the coast of Long Island, New York. That part was eventually recovered after Kid's death. Nobody knows what else he had, but speculation still rages today over how much he is buried and where. Believe it or not, there are some people out there, treasure hunters, that are trying to discover where William Kidd buried his treasure. I was watching a documentary on that a couple years ago. Charles Lee updated. Charles Lee was a British soldier who went on to be a major figure in the Revolutionary War. His father was a colonel in the British Navy and Army and started his son off in a military career early. He was sent to a military academy in Switzerland during his formative years, and then in 1746, Lee became an ensign in his father's regiment. He was sent to the colonies in 1755 to fight in the French and Indian War. He served under Edward Braddock and then later at Fort Ticonderoga, where he was injured in the fighting. Lee recovered and later fought at Fort Niagara. I don't know why I said Nicaragua, a different place. I always thought there was a lot of fort fight spot. He finished his time in the colonies with the British conquest of Montreal. Lee returned to England in 1760, and possibly because he was seeking career advancement. He was named major in 1761 and was sent to fight the Spanish in Portugal. Though his service record there was good, Lee received praise on his return home. In fact, he was retired from the army at half pay. After that, Lee became a vocal critic of military higher-ups and the British Prime Minister, and found that his military career had inexplicably completely stalled. Frustrated with his lack of advancement with the British, Lee moved back to New York in 1773. Quickly became a supporter of the revolutionary cause, and in June of 1775, joined the Continental Army with the rank of Major General. He began his service under the command of George Washington, which graded. This Lee had some hopes of being named Commander-in-Chief of the Army himself. Given Lee's experience, he might have had a point, but he also had his drawbacks. Most notably was his temper. Lee was quick to anger and had a habit of being very vocally and publicly angry when he didn't get his way. Bosses love that. But he also had some rather odd personal quirks. He was exceptionally fond of dogs and was continually surrounded by them. In particular, his... No fucking way. He actually had a Pomeranian. Oh my god, what kind of villain has a Pomeranian? Never trust a man continually surrounded by tiny dogs. He's also an actual historical figure made a villain in this game. He actually had a Pomeranian. He was also vain and liked tailored suits, but rarely washed them, meaning that he smelled a little better than his animals, and worse, according to some. Despite his failings, Lee was both a competent leader and popular with the troops. Washington recognized it and named one of the forts on the Hudson River Fort Lee in his honor. If Washington was hoping that just naming a fort after him smoothed over their war relationship, it amazingly didn't work. In fact, as time went on, Lee became less and less fond of Washington and became reluctant to follow his orders at all. When Washington retreated across New York and New Jersey in 1776, he sent several commands to Lee to follow him, which Lee did, but very slowly, which may be what resulted in him being left behind and captured by the British in 1776. So it's understandable, he probably had to stop every 5 minutes to let his bloody dogs piss in a hedge. Fortunately for Lee, he resigned his commission in the British Army shortly after taking on his role in the Continental Army. That meant instead of being tried for being a deserter, his imprisonment in New York was more of an inconvenience. He was wined and dined by the British, allowed to have whomever he wanted as a dinner guest. It was basically a bed and breakfast, and in return Lee gave up the information about the state of the Continental Army. When he was finally released from New York, he was convinced that the Continental Army couldn't hold his own against the British and told Congress so. However, when Washington decided to go ahead with the plans to attack the British colony in Monmouth, Lee insisted on being in charge. Once the battle began, Lee ordered his dogs to retreat. Modern historians are still debating the reasons why. Maybe they've forgotten his dog retreats and they tend to need to go get them. Washington swept in and took command, turning a complete rout of his army into a draw. They received a very thorough and public dressing down. Afterward, Lee demanded an apology for a court-martial to clear his name. Washington chose a court-martial, which didn't go as Lee had hoped. Was found guilty of misbehavior before the enemy, making a shameful and disorderly retreat and disrespect to the commander-in-chief. He was only given a year's suspension for the crimes. By the time the year was over, he'd been so vocal in his criticism of Washington that Congress removed him from the army. Wow. He retired to a estate in Virginia, passing his time breeding more dogs. Jesus fucking Christ. After his death, he was given a full military funeral, getting all the respect he craved. Too late to do. God, he was one of my favorite antagonists of the series, and I never knew that he had freaking Pomeranians. I didn't even know Pomeranians existed back then. I thought that would have been created from mixed breeding or whatever in the future. Wow. Cannot believe Pomeranians existed back then. Benjamin Church, updated. Benjamin Church was a talented physician and essentially the first Surgeon General of the U.S. Army. Church was born in Rhode Island and graduated from Harvard University in 1754. After meeting him here just out of college, he'll be appointed head of the medical wing of the Continental Army in 1775. For God's sake, don't tell him, he'll go straight to his head. Church goes on to become a vocal patriot, makes him sound like a member of a weird barbershop quartet. Again, another burp. Sorry. But he was a member of the Sons of Liberty and his local committee of correspondence. He'll even speak at the 3rd anniversary of the Boston Massacre. He also got a house in a very nice part of town, being a doctor in West Pigwell. Turns out Church is either an excellent liar or he changed his allegiances from the rebels back to the British sometime before 1775. That's when he was caught sending coded messages to the British forces in Boston. Rather than being hanged for treason, Church was simply jailed and later exiled. That took some fast talking on his part. His defense was that he was actually helping the Continental Army by exaggerating troop estimates, gunpowder stores. That's some quick thinking. Looking for Church, the Continental Army only ever knew about the one coded letter. More modern research has shown that he'd been ferrying papers to the British for some time, possibly to pay off some of his debts. Incidentally, his expensive mansion was seized by the newly formed American government and sold to pay off war debts. But not until after it was ransacked by angry rebels. It may seem like poetic justice, but it's somewhat unfair. At the time, Church wasn't even living there. He left it to his wife, who he abandoned for another woman. Seems he made a habit of betrayal. What a catch. More on the betrayal theme, in telling out to the British, it looks like Church turned traitor on the Templars as well. I can't decide if I think that's incredibly gutsy or terminally stupid. Given how Church ended up, I'm going to go with the latter. He sounds like someone who betrayed himself, at the other hand paid the first him well enough. I still would like to know why exactly Benjamin Church betrayed the Templars. Because the Templars were a powerful organization, even at the past, and they're just borderline untouchable in the present, but like a very stupid move in my opinion. Because William Johnson was a land speculator and Britain's principal treaty negotiator with the indigenous peoples in the northern part of the colonies, particularly the Iroquois. Johnson was born in Ireland but moved to the colonies in 1738 to look after his uncle's property on the Mohawk River. However, it wasn't long before Johnson branched out into business for himself, acquiring property on the opposite side of the river and setting up a sawmill and trading post, which he named Mount Johnson. Really? But should be always sounds like baby instructions from God damn it, Sean. Oh my god. It's in 1743 he moved to even larger God. Oh god. Moved to even larger parcel of land which he named Fort Johnson. He had an excellent businessman, but he is possibly lacked imagination. Uh, Sorry, I still love that caveman thing. Johnson befriended the indigenous peoples in the area, particularly the Kanekahaga, whose language he learned. His respect for their customs helped him rise to prominence as a liaison between the Iroquois people and the British government. Johnson was named superintendent of Indian Affairs in 1756. As a contact knows the land's people, he's probably the best you'll find. In addition to treaty negotiations, Johnson was in charge of recruiting and leading Iroquois fighters during the French and Indian War. He only fought in one battle, but he was awarded handsomely for his service. 5,000 euros and a baronetcy, whatever that means. Baronet? I don't know. That was a little above average for most people involved in that battle. What is a baronetcy? He attended his close ties with the Kanekahaga, and in 1760 they gave him land totaling more than 300 square kilometers as thanks for his work. However, Johnson burned some bridges in 1768 when he negotiated the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. He took much more land than the British had asked for, and it windfall for him since he could then speculate on it. A rather tough sell to the indigenous nations who lived on the land. The treaty caused a war in Virginia known as Dunmore's War. In an effort to stop more bloodshed and possibly to cover his own ass, Johnson called for more negotiations, this time at Johnson Hall, really? In 1774. In case you're wondering, the official reason for Johnson's death was given out as a stroke. I guess publicizing that he was killed while threatening to murder treaty negotiators would probably have caused some political tensions, to put it mildly. I suppose a blow to the head, for example, could be described as a very heavy stroke. Or, you know, a blade to his throat. John Pitcairn. By the way, the assassination for was it William John something Johnson, I don't know what his name is. William Johnson was quite possibly the most glitchy 100% requirements. But John Pitcairn is quite possibly the star of one of my least favorite missions. In 1754, John Pitcairn was a young captain in the British Marine Corps. He fought in the French and Indian War, but I can't find much about his postings. This as being on the HMS Lancaster during the capture of Louisbourg, that's in Canada. No record of him being on the American side of the colonies, but it seems he did some covert work as well. That will explain the lack of details. Pitcairn was promoted to major in 1771 and he gained a reputation for being well liked by his subordinates and praised by his enemies. That's a difficult trick to pull off. Perhaps he had a lovely smile. When Thomas Gage sent British troops to Lesson and Concord, he picked Pitcairn for the job, figuring the rebels would listen to him when it came to time to talk. Instead, Pitcairn was man in charge when his Marines killed 8 militiamen at the Battle of Lesson during the Revolutionary War, severely damaging his reputation as a peacemaker. Most modests can do that. Pitcairn's report on the battle said that he had ordered his men not to fire unless the rebels had fired first. That didn't stop the rumors that he commanded the attack. After he's taken a kinder view, Pitcairn is now considered as one patriot described as a good man and a bad cause. It's historically debated whether Pitcairn went to Lesson and Concord to seize rebel weapon stores or to find and arrest John Hancock and Samuel Adams, who were hiding in Lesson at the time. Possibly it was a little bit of both. Pitcairn's story is that he wanted to find Adams and Hancock to negotiate with him, and he would have been the ideal person to do it, but I'm still puzzled as to why he'd try negotiating a truce with the army at his back, though. It sort of sends a wrong message, don't you think? Thomas Hickey, my least favorite, he started my least favorite sequence, but I really do kind of like his character a little bit. Thomas Hickey was an Irish-born member of the British Navy. He arrived in Boston in 1752, but it wasn't long before he was assigned to William Johnson's personal guard. Apparently at Johnson's request, possibly because our families were connected in Ireland, or maybe he found the name Hickey funny. The record isn't clear. Hickey served under Johnson during the French and Indian War, but then he left the army after being written up several times for disorderly conduct. After 1760, Hickey disappears from the historical record for several years. I do, however, a small mention in William Johnson's household accounts of payments made to T.H. Possible Hickey was working for him as spy. If so, he should really have developed some tougher codes to crack. Hickey resurfaces during the rebel occupation in New York in 1776. He became a member of George Washington's personal guard, commonly known among the soldiers as a lifeguard. Animation did some pretty clever political maneuvering to get him there in his record. I've seen some suggestions that he was a well-respected member of the Connecticut militia. I can't find a service record for him there. And I have my doubts Hickey could have ever been described as well-respected. In any case, Hickey immediately betrayed his commission by planning to assassinate Washington. Perhaps TH stood for that hooligan. History tells us that Thomas Hickey was hanged for sedition and fronted 20,000 troops as an example. That's an interesting interpretation of events, but since New York didn't have stadium seating at its time, I doubt that many of the soldiers had a great view of the execution. The important message for them was, don't be a traitor, you'll get hanged. Not the niceties of who was on the gibbet. Don't know what a gibbet is. Edward Braddock. Edward Bulldog Braddock was a major general placed in charge of British troops at the beginning of the French and Indian War, possibly because he had the nickname like Bulldog. The burp, sorry. Braddock was serving as the acting general of Gibraltar when he received the command in North America. He was given control of 2 regiments of regulars and assigned to win back Fort Duquesne from the French. Sorry, I thought I saw something on my monitor. I just lost my spot. Known as a Braddock expedition, as part of a larger attack on the French colonies on the continent. Braddock had been well liked as the governor of Gibraltar, but things had changed once he reached North America. He had been known for keeping strict order among his troops, but it seems he went beyond that into brutality. He had a reputation for being a quick-tempered and cruel. He also displayed a contempt for non-British soldiers that alienated the colonial militia he was trying to recruit. So, cruel, racist bulldog then. They're my least favorite type of bulldog. Braddock took a bullet through the chest during a battle in 1755. Rumor has it was from one of his own soldiers, which is a job hazard when you're nasty to the people around you and they all have guns. One that the bulldog may have been put down. It was George Washington who carried Braddock from the field on his sash, which Braddock had then entrusted to Washington. That carrying a bit may sound a bit odd, but the sash is bigger than it looks. It's more than 3 meters long and doubled as a field hammock. It says something about officers that they wear a piece of clothing designed to carry their body off of the battlefield, which would also single them out for getting shot at. The ways of war are mysterious. Braddock died of his injuries a few days later. Washington kept the sash. There's something interesting because of concerns that enemy soldiers would desecrate Braddock's body. It was buried under the road so the wagons would run over the earth and hide the gravesite. 1804, road workers discovered that the remains had never moved to another site, which is now marked by a marble monument. Did they even know that that was Edward Braddock's body at the time, though? I mean, how would they know if he was just presumably buried in an unmarked grave? Just literally buried under the road. Unless it was documented somewhere that they buried his body there, but it's kind of odd that people would in 1804 random road workers will find the remains, which is probably bones or something now. It's strange, weird logic. Xiao Jun, an assassin from China. Is this the character that's a star of the Assassin's Creed Chronicles China games? Is one of the last assassins to meet with Ezio Auditore before his death. She was born in royal captivity during the Ming Dynasty. She spent her teenage years alive as one of the favorite concubines of the Chinese Emperor Zhengdi. A not ideal lifestyle, though I wouldn't mind it. It's better than digging dishes. India's taste for travel meant that by the age of 15, Jun had seen more of the world than most people of the era, which I suppose you might consider a bright side. You try not to realize that even some cats have seen more of the world than most people of the era. In 1521, the Assassin Order used the confusion surrounding Zhengdi's death to infiltrate the Emperor's compound, free some of the concubines, Jun among them. She immediately became an assassin, but never forgot the women she'd been forced to leave behind. Years later, she returned to the Imperial Palace to free the remaining concubines, only to find that they had been killed by Zhengdi's successor, Xiao Jun. Xiao Jun's response to the second attack on the Imperial Palace was swift and brutal, and caught the assassins unprepared. The Brotherhood in eastern China was decimated, as Xiao Jun and her mentor survival were forced to flee Asia entirely. They traveled to Italy and to seek the advice of Ezio Auditore, but only Xiao Jun would finish the journey, arriving in Florence in 1524, shortly before Ezio's death. I believe we actually saw that exchange. I think it was a short little video thing called Assassin's Creed Embers or something. I haven't watched that. I've never seen that thing before, but I think that's where you saw that encounter. Reginald Birch. Reginald Birch was a London merchant, the son of another London merchant who, conveniently enough, also had the last name Birch. It seems it was one of those hard to put your finger on things that ran in the family. Birch started in business for himself at an early age. By the time he was in his mid-20s, he already owned several merchant ships, mainly dealing with the tea trade to the American colonies. That's pretty good going, seeing as by the time most people are in their mid-20s, they don't even own a shirt. Having him as part owner of the Providence, among others, later, Birch also owned several businesses in and around London. Was a member of White's, which was a posh gentleman's club in London, and generally as a well-known and respected man about town. From what I can tell, Birch met Hickman Kenway while working for his father, Edward. They were introduced at White's while Hatham was still quite young. Birch would eventually take over Hatham's education, tutoring him while on a tour of Europe in the 1730s. From what you see in the anime, it seems their friendship continued into adulthood, with them working together as members of the Assassins. Wasn't Reginald Birch the head of the Templars, though? Hatham Kenway. Hatham Kenway is a Templar who came to the American colonies in 1754. For what he learned, Kenway was sent here by Grandmaster, he is a Grandmaster, Reginald Birch, with the dual mission to establish his own Templar group to rival the colonial assassins and search for clues about artifacts related to the first civilization. And when the Grandmaster tells you to do something, you do it, even if it's just a chess Grandmaster. Kenway didn't find the artifacts he was looking for. He did, however, recruit a small, dedicated band of Templars. He also attempted to forge a relationship with the Kanekahaga in the frontier. One woman in particular, Zio or something? I don't know how to pronounce her name. The two were briefly lovers, and however brief it was enough, because Zio something, unbeknownst to Hatham, ended up raising their son Connor. I'm guessing it was Kenway who became Grand Master in the colonies, and therefore the man responsible for the 1763 attack on the colonial assassins. That attack wiped out most of the membership and almost all of our records from that area. It's never been clear exactly what happened in that attack, how Kenway managed to make it such a complete surprise. He had a secret weapon. Shay Patrick Cormac. Oh, there was more to it. Whoops. Really excited to play that game. In any case, I don't think I like this guy. Sorry to use such strong words. Not really a strong word. Altair ibn Ahad. Altair was born in the Assassin Brotherhood in the stronghold of Masyaf. His early life was a happy one. His mother died during childbirth. Then, when he was a young boy, his father was killed during the first siege of Masyaf. Only shortly thereafter, the assassin he died to committed suicide in front of the 11-year-old Altair. With his parents gone, Altair looked at Al-Mualim, the then mentor of the order, as a father figure. Al-Mualim recognized Altair's potential and took on his training personally. Altair reached the rank of a master assassin by the age of 25, an unheard of accomplishment if there was an assassin book of records. There'd probably be a picture of this fella on the front. Altair was one of the best fighters in assassin history. which is honestly debatable in my opinion because Altair was kind of a basic fighter in comparison to the other assassins that you play as. I mean, I'm sure he was probably more impressive in lore, but I honestly didn't really find Altair that impressive in combat when they actually play Assassin's Creed 1. With an arrogance to match. After a disastrous mission in 1191 in which he broke the creed and very nearly let an apple of Eden fall into Templar hands, Altair was sent back down to novice rank and forced to begin again. As part of his rehabilitation, he was responsible for taking out the major players in the Templar Order at the time, including the Grand Master Robert de Sab. That is, I believe, how you pronounce the name. I think it's actually pronounced Robert de Sab. Tragically, in the end, he was also forced to kill Am-Walim, who turned out to be both a Templar and corrupted by the influence of the Apple. After his mentor's death, Altair took control of the Order, turning it into the secret and world-spanning organization it is today. One thing that made Altair such a deadly assassin was something we now call Eagle Vision, kind of sixth sense inherited from the first civilization. It allowed him to read his enemies and surroundings in a way that goes beyond what the human eye can see. Of course, you'll know more about that than me. I can't believe I just typed that because it's in your blood, and that's part of why you're here. Well, let's be honest. You knew you weren't here because of my enduring affection or my warm and passionate cuddles. God, that's a scary thought. SEO Auditorium, one of my favorite assassins.